So my name's Annie Swinsinski, and I graduated from the Savannah College of Art and Design in 2001. And I originally, upon graduating, mostly found myself doing a lot of graphic design work, freelance, small-time logos and whatnot. But I fell into a more creative role eventually by wanting to take my graphic art in a more freeing, creative sort of avenue. So I started printmaking, and most of the prints that I had done in my printmaking and wood carving career were very graphically oriented. So I sort of carried over my graphic design composition into my printmaking work a lot. After I started printmaking for a while, I found I even wanted to be even a little more liberal with my creative process, so I began painting. My painting's still very bold and graphic, but definitely a little more liberal and creative and expressive in the ways that they came through. So I would say that that's for the most part where I went into my career with painting and printmaking, and I am most widely known as a painter and printmaker at the moment. Once I fell into the painting career, I started doing large format works that were created out of pigments that had true metals in them, like copper, bronze, brass, and I would then oxidize those paintings to a true patina or true rust. So my work became very much about the decomposition of things, the beauty of things that are falling apart, which is also known, you may have heard of wabi-sabi. It's the beauty of things imperfect, impermanent, incomplete, modest, humble, and unconventional. And I focused on that for a very, very long time. And I think the transition into jewelry happened pretty organically, but it was sort of a flip or a reverse of that whole theory of the beauty of impermanence. I started to want to preserve the impermanence, which is sort of a little bit of a mind bender. But I found inspiration, from the things around me, just walking through the woods every day with my dog or sitting in the backyard. I'd pick up, a leaf that had fallen from a tree, and finding the beauty in that impermanence, I would try to make it permanent. And that's sort of how I fell into the jewelry making and the transition that happened there. So I do that, making the impermanent permanent by casting these items in silver, copper, bronze, in actual metals to be worn every day. So basically I start by loading the dog in the car and heading out to one of the local trails. My favorite trail to walk on is Shingletown, and that's very local here out towards Boalsburg. And it's essentially just walking with my camera. I usually just take my camera phone with me. I also find myself picking up small objects from the ground, different types of moss, different types of bark, fallen leaves, insects that have met their demise. So after I've collected these items, a lot of times I take them in my car, bring them back to the studio, and I look at the photographs and I look at the items, and I just kind of think to myself, how am I going to translate this into an actual piece of jewelry that can then be worn every day? That takes a little bit of time, and I can honestly say that some of the pieces I come out with, you would not be able to see the direct correlation of where it came from, but to me it could be sometimes just the color or a simple shape that you see that kind of is the translation of that piece. So once it's back in my studio, I'll make some initial quick sketches of my ideas, whether I want it to be a ring or a necklace. And then I go into sort of this prototyping stage where I use clay or wax or anything that can be shaped and formed, and I create a rough, sort of like a rough version of the object, not to be worn, but just for composition purposes. So I wouldn't consider it a working prototype in any way, just to see, if I like the texture, if I feel it's the right size, I can hold it up and say, oh, this is kind of big to be an earring, whatever. Once that initial prototype is made, I move into the actual metal and the metal forming. A lot of times the metals I'm using are precious metals like silver, so it can become like really quite expensive if I go straight to silver, so that's why I do the initial prototyping process that I do. Sometimes I have to go through 10 different prototypes before I create a design in the actual metal. The process that I've been currently using is a process that's referred to as precious metal clay. And they're microscopic particles of metal which are suspended in a clay binder. So I'm able to sculpt and mold the clay just like it was the clay that I used in my prototype. So once I'm sculpting and molding the clay, I'm letting it dry, and that clay can then be fired in a kiln. And the clay binder burns away, and you're left with the just the original precious metal that has been sintered to a solid piece. So once that piece has been created, a lot of times I'll wear it myself out into the public, at work, and around. I try to get, feedback from people. Oh, those are nice earrings. Where did you get those? Or sometimes I'll wear it one day at work and it falls off. And so that I kind of go through my own testing process before I release anything on my website for sale to the public. So that's fun because I also get to keep a little bit of everything myself. If the design is successful, I end up having one myself as well. So, but yeah, so that's sort of the testing and prototyping process that I go through to create the pieces before they end up on my website for sale to other people. I think that so far the feedback that I've gotten from the people that have bought my work has been pretty positive and pretty successful, and I think people are sort of believing in the vision that I'm putting out there, so that's very exciting. There's fine jewelry that is certainly for the elite. It's, the diamonds and the gold, and then there's sort of like this other shelf over here where it's costume jewelry, which is absolutely beautiful, but when I buy it and I wear it regularly, it's only lasting me 30 days, 40 days, before it's turning green around my neck or, falling off or falling apart. And so I feel like the medium of precious metal clay, which is also 100% recycled metal, which is wonderful to use, allows me to create jewelry that is still made from precious metal, but do it affordably enough, and in a solidified and solid enough way that it's a quality product for the person that's buying my work. I almost consider them to be heirloom pieces. I think they'll last just as long as the gold and diamond ring that someone is buying for their wife as an anniversary gift or an engagement ring. Because I'm using the solid precious metals that I'm using, I think the product will last. But yet I'm able to do it in a way that is more affordable. The manufacturing process that I'm using is not, incredibly extensive that I have to charge, a lot for the piece. So that's that weird niche that I'm trying to fill in the jewelry market. I would like my work to be accessible to people regardless of their economic status. And I was the same way with painting and printmaking actually as well. One of the reasons I first got into printmaking was because you're able to make multiples of the same piece of artwork. I could do an edition of 100 and they were all original. And so I was able to sell those 100 prints affordably.
Now, how does failure play a role in your creative process?
It plays a huge role in my creative process. Obviously, going through the prototypes and the non-working and the working prototypes, the ones that I wear out into the world each day, sometimes I'm extremely discouraged. If I wear something around for 3 days and I'm finding it's not the best solution for a necklace. The clasp is constantly falling down to the front of my neck. It's too heavy, it needs to be lighter. I think I grow easily discouraged, but when I really sit back and think about it, it's a learning process, just like any other mistakes you make in life. It comes back into my studio and I sit back down at the sketchbook and say, okay, so this didn't work. What did I learn from it so that I can make it better? And I think it's important to focus on, okay, well, what did you learn? Because that's just constant information and feedback that you can use to make the product better in the future. For the most part, my feedback is coming from the website that I have, for example. There's an analytics page. I'm able to check it and see what people are purchasing the most, what people are viewing the most. They're able to leave feedback on what their favorite purchases were. So that's extremely helpful for me. When I go into something like doing the arts festival like I'm going to do this July, those are obviously going to be the top pieces that I have the most inventory of, because I've seen that that is what people want to buy and want to look at. So that's been very helpful for me, taking it into the real world and a larger marketplace, which is sort of what July will be for me. So the future plans for Annie Lane Jewelry, there's several phases that I'm really interested in going through. Obviously, I mean, I think the first phase is to get my name out there as much as possible. So being able to attend, the festival that I'm attending in July, which has an extremely wide audience. It's ranked in the top 5 in the country as far as festivals of its kind. I think I'll be able to reach a very, very wide audience and get my name out there. With the success of that festival, my plan to continue to create new lines of jewelry is to find inspiration from other areas of the globe. So my hope is to take profit from that particular festival and seek out a volunteer trip that I can take to another country or even to another area of the United States that I'm less familiar with. Volunteer, work in a community, work in an orphanage, do some sort of good in that area, while still keeping a very good record of everything around me. The colors, the textures, the people, the fabrics they're wearing, the artwork, via photo, video, sketchbook. And then come back from that area and design a new line of jewelry based solely on that experience. So, an example might be me going to northern Thailand, for example, working in an orphanage there or teaching English there, recording my experience for a month, coming back and designing a line of jewelry that becomes, the Thailand line, for example. So I'd like to do something like that once a year as a way of giving back. And I think that'll allow me to continue to keep gaining inspiration for continued learning new processes and using new colors and new techniques. I think being able to come back from those places and create something that was solely based on that will just be able to continue my experience to grow, really.